Okay, friends, I'm going to call this meeting to order at 6 p.m. Members present this evening are myself, Mayor Morrow, Council Members Seo, Dillon, Gearbaugh, McClellan, Mitchell, and Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. From City staff, we have City Manager Campbell, Clerk Royal, City Superintendent Engineer Rubel, DPW Director Fordyce, and Police Chief Rennick. The rest of you who are in the audience this evening, we appreciate your attendance, and we would encourage you to sign in the back to my left. At this time, the Chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as submitted unless there are amendments. As submitted, Ms. Dillon? Yes. Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilwoman McClellan. Hearing no discussion, all those in favor of approving the agenda as submitted signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. I will note, for the benefit of those in the audience, it had been the tradition at City Council work meetings for many, many years to have the public comment period at the end of the meeting. About a month and a half ago, we changed that, and we will now accept public comments. And the genesis for doing such is if you raise questions and concerns at this period, there's the chance that we're able to address them during the course of our discussion. So under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question to City Council. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments? David, please, and if you'd come to the podium and make sure to speak into the microphone, we would appreciate that.
David Rhodes, 257 South Ann Arbor Street. This issue that we have before us this evening for you all is parking, of course.
Should have green lights on at the base there.
Now I'm on. Okay. I'll start over. David Rhodes, 257 South Ann Arbor Street here in Saline. Parking is, of course, the main topic for the work session here this evening. And as many of you know, I served for a number of years on City Council, and we talked about parking many times. And we tried to make some adjustments in how we designated parking spaces, in the length of time that people could park there, on enforcement or non-enforcement. And none of those things seem to actually solve the problem. They just sort of move things around, and you're going to hear some data this evening on a current situation, which I believe has not changed very much over the last 6 or 8 years. One of the difficulties seems to be the funding issue of anything that might happen with parking. And so the current issue of Governing Magazine has an entire section devoted to public and private partnerships, P3 organizations. And those are agreements typically for a longer period of time where the public, the municipality, puts something into a project and private developers put the rest of it into it, and they work together over a period of time. So it would appear to me that that might have some possibilities for what we currently call lot number 2. That one is large enough that it could have a parking structure on it. Parking structures, when they're built, require some extensive footings under them, and so you have to go down about 4 feet into the ground anyway to find some stable soil to build on. So my thinking was, if that were to proceed, that there could be one level of underground parking and then 2 levels above that are covered, and then the roof could be the 3rd level. So you can get 4 levels of parking on that lot. One of the contacts that I had made mentioned that on a lot that is 120 feet wide by 270 feet long, you could create 800 parking spaces. Well, lot number 2, I think, is about 120 by 200 feet long, and it only has 86 parking spaces on it now. So if we could construct even 400 parking spaces on that, we could double the number of parking spaces that we have in our downtown, and that would serve us for some period of time. Now, I know, and you all know, parking structures cost more to build and to maintain per parking space than street level stuff does. But I don't think we can afford in this community to eat up any more of our ground level space with parking. We need more revenue generating properties and spaces for businesses and for individuals to live. And so I have been kind of an advocate before for a parking structure, and I continue to be that. And I'd be really happy to work with anybody who might think that that's a viable way to move forward. So thank you.
Thank you, David. We appreciate your comments. Additional citizen comments? Bill, please.
Go ahead.
Thanks. I'm Bill Kinley, 843 Asa Gray Drive in Ann Arbor. I think we all will agree that downtown is the face of Saline. It's the downtown of every community. And that face depends on the viability of the tenants, the business people that make it their livelihood to provide services, food, all kinds of things that we like to have and consider part of the fabric of Saline. I will say that many of the business owners downtown feel very, very constricted by the lack of parking at peak times. The many times of the day and the week you can drive through each one of the lots and find there are vacant spaces. The studies that you have attached to the studies attached to the study that you have show that many parts of the day there are a lot of parking spaces available. That's not the problem. The problem is the peak periods. The peak periods are lunchtime, and I noticed some of the studies were done at 11:30 and 3:30. That's not the time to look at it. It's the time at 12:30, and particularly Thursday, Friday days. Evenings from 5:30 to 7:30 toward the weekend, it gets to be peak time. Parking lots are planned for peak demand, and right now peak demand is achieved and more so. If you reach peak demand of the parking spaces and people think about coming to a restaurant, because that's what's driving a good share of the demand for downtown, it's entertainment like every community. If people have the perception that when they get there on Friday at 6:30 they can't find a parking place 2 to 3 times in a row, the next time they'll go up near Briarwood or near Myers and they'll find a place with peak demand satisfied. Parking needs to be addressed by council. Been talking about it for years. Council made 15, 20, 25 years ago, made a great contribution to the vitality of downtown by developing parking lot number 2. For those who were involved at that time, you remember it was a series of purchases of back parts of lots. They made a serious commitment, and that allowed the kind of expansion we've had in downtown Saline. Right now, we need more expansion of spaces, and part of that can be achieved in the northwest corner of Michigan and Ann Arbor Saline Road. That will take some money, not a great amount in the scheme of things, but it will take some money. The low-hanging fruit is to go along with some of the recommendations that you have in front of you, and you're going to hear presented tonight, that are policy decisions. The policy decisions I thoroughly, totally agree with what the committee has come up with. Those are easy policy decisions. They were developed by business people for the council to take a look at, and hopefully will agree that that will help solve on a temporary basis some of this problem. The need is to be there to be recognized that as businesses expand, as more apartments are developed downtown, that's when the parking demand is really going to be overburdened. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it. Additional citizen comments?
Mary Hess, longtime taxpayer. I was on council when we, in fact, got the second parking area, and we had more money then. And I think that's important as far as our revenue. And presently, we have 2 big problems, and one of them being the disposal plant. And the other one is our infrastructure, which the mayor has talked about with concern. One thing is when you talk about the plans tonight that the downtown association or whatever have come up, I am hoping that you will put a monetary price to it so everyone has some idea of the amount of money we're talking, be it a parking structure, being a whatever, because I think that's only fair to put a monetary figure on it. But I would hope that we already have a good bond as far as on the rec center, and we have a bond on the disposal plant, and apparently you're going to meet in a couple of weeks as far as how we maybe are going to work a little bit more on the disposal plant and what the financing might be. So there's a lot of things that definitely are impacting the city also. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hess. Are there additional citizen comments? Please.
Yes, my name is Kathy Finger. I represent John Dunn, the developer for the former Mangiamo's property, and just wanted to express our concern with both, the peak parking with restaurant that we're putting in on the main level, and also the need for residential parking within the downtown for the apartments that we've just started building. So, thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Additional citizen comments? Well, we appreciate everyone's thoughts and observations. I do want to remind my colleagues, and you should have received an email to this effect, I will be leaving, albeit momentarily, at about 20 till 7 to briefly attend an opioid forum that the sheriff is hosting at Saline High School. Mayor Pro Tem Tahar and I have already discussed this. She'll be taking over, and I'll probably return half hour, 40 minutes later at the very latest. So I'm going to, unless you have comments, I'm going to turn it over to Riley and Wally in just a moment. The reason for calling this meeting to discuss downtown parking is to simplify the issue. If we continue on the current trajectory, we're going to have some very serious problems in terms of the viability of our downtown in the ensuing years. And I think it's absolutely critical that leaders be forward-thinking and try and address problems before they become really serious issues that no longer have a quick or easily identifiable solution. Needless to say, when you reviewed your packet that was delivered to your house on Thursday evening, Saline Main Street, specifically Wally and Riley, have put a lot of time into to this presentation. I had the opportunity to sit down and enjoy lunch with them last week and go over it. It is very thorough, very comprehensive. As was mentioned during the public comment period this evening, there are a number of short-term solutions that are recommended, and then there are some things that we need to be thinking about. Well, they're more long-term, probably 5-10 years out. But without further ado, gentlemen, I'll turn it over to you. We appreciate your time and all of the other downtown business owners, property owners, and stakeholders who are in attendance this evening. Wally, would you like to begin? And the only thing I would request is make sure you do speak into the microphone because we are recording tonight's meeting.
Okay. I just wanted to thank everybody for allowing us to come and present this to you. Most of the information, or actually a lot of the information that we based our recommendations on, and also come from three things. One is the parking utilization study that we did, which was an inventory that we took over the last 10, or in a 10-day period over 2 weeks. Some comes from a publication that was done by the National Historic Preservation through Saline Main Street, which is best practices for downtown parking. And then we also took information from a parking study that was done for the city of Saline in 2002. So that's where we get a lot of the information so that you know where we got it from. We'll go through the slides pretty quickly, and I'm assuming that everybody had an ample opportunity to review the information. And then that way we can answer, save more time to answer some questions in terms of what we're proposing. I think would probably be the best way to go forward with it.
Sounds great. Gentlemen, if you want to tag team this, if one of you wants to stand there, I don't know. You want to do that, Riley?
Okay. Yep, sure.
And then Riley, you're also welcome to speak, and just utilize the microphone there at the podium. So gentlemen, what we'll do is you take as much time as you want.
Okay.
When you conclude with your remarks, we'll work our way around the table addressing questions and concerns that council members have.
Do you want to?
Yeah, actually, I want to address something really fast in the packet here. I was kind of going over it after Bill's talked. In your parking utilization study that we did for the 2-week span, if you look at number 1, number 4, and number 5, those are not percentage available space. Those are percentage not available. I want to make sure that's clear. We had probably about 5 volunteers doing this during the time, and there was some mixed confusion about counting empty spaces or counting cars. So when you look at that and it says percentage available, that's not available at that point. So if you look at 1, 4, and 5, I apologize for that, but I did notice that as I was going through there. So.
Okay, so the first slide, just some basic information. I did have the opportunity to talk to the owner and the general manager of the Smokehouse 52. They're planning on about 45 to 55 employees to start. And they're concerned about the parking also. They've done their due diligence in terms of coming downtown at various times, checking out the restaurants that are there. And they're concerned about lack of parking on certainly peak hours on Thursdays and Fridays and Saturdays. So that's about it. You can flip to the next one. There's not a whole lot there with that. Just a basic parking map with the 5 public lots. I think the interesting thing, and there's another slide later that shows some more information, but just the number of parking spaces total that are public downtown are only 364. So, and then these are parking practices that basically we took from the Carlisle-Wortman city survey that was done in 2002, and also from the publication from Saline Main Street, or not Saline Main Street, but National Main Street that I referred to. Probably the main things to highlight in that is that, that the preferred walking destination from any parking place to any downtown destination is 400 feet. The big recommendation to create a process of parking system organization, management, and planning, and hopefully this is the beginning of that now. Our real key issue is the average shopping or business meeting takes less than 90 minutes. Therefore, all information that I read, and we read a lot of different information to try to put this together, always suggested that 2-hour parking is the most appropriate. If you have any less than 2-hour appropriate, it really becomes an issue where your downtown employees start to manipulate your parking system. And the only way to really control that is by effective enforcement.
Well, we're getting a little bit of feedback on that, Mike. Just pull it away from you, just a touch.
Okay.
There you go.
Now doesn't even sound like you hear it now. You hear it? Okay. And then regular reviews of parking plans for future strategic planning. So, parking inventory survey. These are things that we kind of looked at when we found a lot of them are common sense if you just come downtown on a continuous basing. Lot 1, there's a lack of parking after 6:30. Lot 2 appears that downtown employees and residents are not utilizing the all-day parking. That's created a parking concern during business hours. That's the one lot that we actually did do more studies because it's the one behind my place. So we actually did a 9:30, a 11:30, a 12:30, a 3:30, a 6:30, and an 8:30 just to get more basis on when restaurant traffic was coming. Lot 3 not being 100% utilized by downtown employees or residents, and that would be the all-day lot. Sure.
Can you refer to the lots by name or street? Because
Sure.
not everybody that's around
Sure.
can be on that.
Sure. So lot 1 would be the one behind Dan's. Lot 2 would be the one behind Max. Lot 3 would be the one across the street on Harris, which is the all-day 24-hour lot. Or Henry, I'm sorry. Did I say Harris? Yeah, Henry, I'm sorry. Lot 4 would be Brecken Grill. And lot 5 would be the city lot that's behind the Key Bank lot off of, Lot 5, there's adequate parking, but be more utilized by downtown employees and residents. So there's opportunity to move people around, create more, downtown parking for that. And then the Key Bank lot, huge opportunity to gain additional parking, but Lot 5 and Key Bank should be combined to improve to make it more pedestrian friendly. So recommendations, what we tried to do with these recommendations, and we tried to look at this as kind of a giant puzzle where, we have all-day parking for downtown employees that we need to be, need to satisfy. We have retail parking that needs to be satisfied for people that want to come down and shop and eat. We also have people that live downtown, and there's a challenge for downtown parking too. And if you look at the new, the 8 new apartments that are coming in the Maggiano's building with the restaurant, they're the couple of meetings that I've been involved in with the owner for that building. He's looking at high-end apartments with stainless steel and good finishes, high rent, the type of people that will come down and frequent our downtown. It's hard to get that level of, income for that kind of apartment if there's not some sort of parking that goes with it. So I think when you look at everything together, there has to be some thought put into how that's going to be figured out too. So what we try to do is we try to list this in three areas. One is kind of immediate actions or actions that the city perhaps could act on that wouldn't cost a lot of money or would be something that could easily be done and pretty quick. The second recommendations would be ones that would be a little bit more intensive, but also not that cost, there wouldn't be a whole lot of cost attributed to that. Certainly not like building a structure. And the third would be looking at long terms in terms of what are we going to do when we've exhausted all those other avenues, and how do we capture funds to get to that point? And that's, something that, we asked you to work on. So the immediate actions: reduce all parking lots from 4 to 2 hours aligned with best practices, except for the all-day parking, and enforce consistently. Change the street parking ordinance to allow parking on both sides of the streets where appropriate. We thought there might be some opportunity on McKay and on Henry, like behind Max and that block. Increase all-day parking spaces, locate the expansion farther away from business. So maybe take some of the spots behind in lot, like 2 and 4, and make them a few more all-day parking spots, but then really, really hone down on enforcement, so that employees aren't manipulating them now, because now with the 4A parking, there's a lot of people that are working in the businesses downtown that come and they park at 8:30, and then they go have lunch at 12, and then they come back with their McDonald's at 12:30, park in a different spot, and then they're there for the rest of the afternoon, and they're taking the closer spots and not necessarily taking the 4-hour spots across the street and utilizing them. So post all street parking is 2 hours. I know some of them are posted. Some of the street parking signs haven't come back out after construction, like the ones on Henry that were that, and repaint the spaces so that they're actually visible, because a lot of them aren't even visible. And then coming up with just more clever ways to, post customer parking only signs 2 hours, and maybe all day parking, and just so that it maybe, someone that might not, an all-day person might not turn into a spot that says customer parking only 2 hours. They might be more hesitant to do that. And then more short-term recommendations: explore public-private parking cooperative arrangements. The churches, Clindenberg, the new building beside us, the banks, allow parking on Michigan Avenue in front of Saline Automotive. Enhance the pedestrian-friendly walkability connections between business and parking lots, landscaping, wayfinding, et cetera. And I think that was more trying to connect that parking lot 5 to downtown, where, if you park down there now and you cut through Key Bank, you're walking up a slope. There's no real way to get there unless you walk all the way around, unless you cut over, the grass and the hills and, stones and stuff like that. And then long-term actions: reconfigure the Key Bank space, and I think that was in the packet for the Becken and Rader proposal that was done. And then, try to access that Key Bank lot. I know that that's something that's come up in the past. To try to utilize that, if we could get that lot and utilize it, it would add more parking too. And then these are estimates in the red that basically would increase that would give us, that's just an estimate of how many spaces we can get by doing all of those things. And then, purchase property with the intent to expand parking. It was brought to our attention that what's the name of that church? I don't, which church is it?
First Presbyterian.
First Presbyterian Church. I know that they're interested in sharing or doing something with the city to get rid of that park and then the house they own next to it, because they have a lack of parking for their services. And that might be something that may be, you're shaking your head. I don't, that goes beyond me. It was just brought up at a meeting that we were at. And then explore the building of a parking structure similar to downtown Plymouth. So. This was some information that we got from other communities, and I think it's just pertinent because if you look at it and compare us to them, some of the things they're doing. Plymouth, 2-hour parking on the street, and they enforce from 9 to 9. They do have a parking structure that they paid for with bond and TIFA money. Some lots are 8-hour parking, some are all day. They loosely enforce that. They do ticket, first ticket, warning, second, it's a tiered system. They're considering all paid parking in the early stages. Had an issue with consistent enforcement, ended up hiring parkman enforcement officer. I think probably the big thing when you look at that is if you look at the census population, and I know they're not apples to apples, Plymouth to Saline, but there's 9,000 people and there's 900 to 1,000 public parking spaces. And then if you look at Dexter, which is a smaller, that's a community that's smaller, they've got approximately 700 spaces in their downtown for public parking. So that's something that we took from there that was kind of interesting. So. These are some things that were in the 2002 City of Saline Parking Management Study. They talk about the current 2-hour time limitation being effective, that they thought that that's something that should be kept. That's, basically in there. I think if, one of the things that I got from, we went through a lot of research in terms of trying to find best practices, and then we came across the parking management study after we did all the research, and then we kind of did all our due diligence in terms of our parking inventories, and it probably was all in that study that would happen in 2002 to begin with. It really addressed what would happen if there was more development downtown, which is actually what happened. So.
Riley, anything you'd like to add? No. Well, gentlemen, Wally specifically, put a lot of time and energy into this, and we appreciate your leadership. This is very thorough. Here's how this is going to work, and Mayor Pro Tem Tarr will assist me when I make my exit in 15 minutes. We'll work our way around the table and address any questions, concerns that you may have. Of course, they can be directed to either Wally or Riley, but we also have staff present as well as a number of other downtown property and business owners. Subsequent to all of the questions being exhausted, I'd like to break up our subsequent discussion into sort of 3 areas. One, I'd like to see about developing consensus on the immediate plan for action that was recommended on page 6. Subsequent to that, we can begin a discussion on short-term action, and then if there's time, we can talk a little bit more about long-term actions, which are 1.5 to 5 years out. Does that make sense to you, Mayor Pro Tem Tarr? Okay, excellent. Well, let me, again, please remember to speak into the microphone because we are recording tonight's meeting. Linda, I will start with you, and then we'll work our way around the table and end with Jack. Ms. McClellan, can you make sure
Sorry.
that's the microphone?
Sorry. Flipping pages here too. Okay. So I have notes throughout, so it's a little scattered, sorry. The first, under best practices, maximum preferred walking distance from parking to destination and in downtown is 400 feet. So I didn't actually go out and measure this, but I know the lot my house is on is 50 feet wide, as is the lot next to it. So I figured that 400 feet is approximately from the end of my driveway across from parking lot number 5 and to Ann Arbor Street. So approximately from the driveway of parking lot number 5 to Ann Arbor Street. So it seems like parking lot number 5, kind of by definition under best practices, is a non-starter from the get-go, which explains why I consider it my empty parking lot. So I guess I would just comment about that the 400 feet seems like a barrier to crossing Michigan Avenue. I mean, Michigan Avenue in itself we've talked about as a barrier in and of itself. So have you given any, did you talk about Michigan Avenue and distances, as Michigan Avenue as a factor in the distances away from businesses?
Well, I think the reason that we focused on that 400 feet was one was that was, it was a recommendation if you're starting with nothing and you can put parking, you want to put parking as close as you can for those things. I think what it shows us, when you look at parking lot 5, the one that's right across from you, is that there's where your opportunity is to push employees in terms of some sort of enforcement policy, so that you're forcing them to park there because they park where else there's tickets. It might be something where that could become, there could be spots there that are designated for people that are living downtown and need access. You could issue permits. It might be even a way to collect revenue somehow to address that. So when we looked at that, we looked at it as you certainly want to keep as many people at a Dan's lot that don't need to be there as possible, so that they can frequent those businesses. You want to keep everybody in lot 4 so they can frequent those businesses. You want to keep everybody at a lot 2 so they can frequent those businesses. And if you can move some of those people that are parking there all day and need more long-term parking to lot 5 and 3 across the street, then that's how you utilize it that way. So it was more that.
So you touched on 2 of my other questions. I'll try if I hope I can remember them without looking at my notes. So one is for enforcement. Parking lot number 1 seems to have the most pressure at night, maybe.
1 and 2, I'd say.
Yeah, so.
And 4 will be. I'm pretty confident in that.
Right. So when you recommend changing the parking limits and increasing enforcement, what hours were you envisioning for enforcement? Because that's not in here.
Well, other cities have gone 9 to 9. That's a tough question, because you certainly don't want to put anybody coming downtown into a situation where you're giving them parking tickets when they come to dine and they've been there for over 2 hours. But still, the challenge in that option is my employees come to work and I'm not paying attention, and 6 of them park in that parking lot behind me. That's revenue that both Salt Springs and I lose, because someone's going through that parking lot on Friday night and can't find parking. So if there's not some, so the challenge is to find a way to discourage that somewhat. And enforcement's one of the ways. So maybe you do 2 hours during the day, maybe you do 3 hours at night, maybe you enforce till 6 o'clock, because most people are there by then, and then you don't enforce until after 6. That's something that we, that everyone would have to sit down at the table and find out what's best to work, but, so.
And the other question was related to employees. Have business owners talked about ways to incentivize employees to park in the legal spots so that the city doesn't have to be the nanny?
Everybody's different, so that's, and that's a challenge. We make it a condition of employment. So during the day, you either have to park in lot 3 across the street or in the Key Bank lot. And after 5, you either have to be in the Key Bank lot, or we made arrangements to lease Andy Warner's lot below the gas station. So we issue permits, and our employees are allowed to park there, but only in the evening, and they can't be overnight. And it cost me $200 in gift certificates a month, which is a no-brainer. And I tried to bring other restaurants into that fold, and they thought $200 for the gift certificate was too much, and so they don't necessarily want to enforce it the same way. So not everybody thinks the same way, so it's hard to get.
Right. I guess the other thing is probably more of an observation than a question. When I looked at the Plymouth and Dexter information, the mix of businesses and things going on in Plymouth's downtown and even in Dexter's downtown is somewhat different from ours. So, it's interesting, and informative to see this information. I'm not sure population is the only comparative comparison, though. And it's really more of an observation.
I don't think it is. I agree with that, but I think when we included that for a couple reasons. One is if you were a restaurant company, say, and you were going to open a restaurant in a downtown area, and you were doing your due diligence, you would look at areas that had the most to offer you in terms of, not only your demographics and your customer basis and all that stuff, but certainly the infrastructure to support you. And if you look at, if you look at the amount of spaces they have with the amount of activity they have, I think we're still at a disadvantage in Saline based on those numbers. It's not apples to apples, and I realize that too if you go there. So.
Right, okay, thank you. That's
Yeah.
very
No.
helpful. You answered my non-question.
Okay.
Very well, thanks.
All right.
Councilwoman McClellan.
Yeah, my main question, I think, was just addressed with the employee policies. I feel like, is there anything else that, I know you're really diligent about it and, it's a condition of employment, but to me, it seems like if you're asking the city to do something to try and keep the rotation going, that you would be willing to do something yourself as a business person to maintain those employees parking somewhere that your customers aren't going to be parking. So I don't know if there's a policy thing with that. We don't really have any control of that, I don't think, but.
Every publication or downtown policy we looked at basically stated in the very beginning, if you don't have consistent enforcement, your employees will take over the parking system.
Right.
I think it's nature.
Right.
Some owners feel they're, business is okay. It's not, I don't have time to chase my employees and let, force them into, there's other, I've talked to everybody and I get several different, I don't know what the answer is, but they all say that consistent enforcement is the only way to protect your parking system from employee parking.
It's good to know. And then the 400 feet number, is that a relative number? Is that all across the board? Like, I'm just thinking in Ann Arbor. Like, when you're in Ann Arbor, if you can find a spot in 400 feet from where you're going, it's a good spot. You know what I mean? Where in Saline, if you find one that's 450, you're like, oh my God, I gotta walk so far.
I think that's a...
Yeah,
I think that's a lot of times when you go to Ann Arbor, though, and a lot of times when I go to Ann Arbor, I may have an idea where I'm going, but I don't always end up there because there's so many more choices and stuff
Right,
too. So
right,
it's a
that's
little bit of a different situation. That 400 feet was just something that was in there that we thought was relevant. I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah. Well, my question, I guess, it related
somebody
to that
way
is,
smarter than me came up with that figure. So.
Is there something in the wayfinding or a sidewalk or a landscaping plan that could change the function of essentially the parking lot on McKay and the parking lot number 3 that sort of makes it more of a easier access? Because I think right now it's sort of tucked away. People don't even realize that it's a parking lot.
I think parking lot 5 aesthetically is disjointed from downtown.
Yeah.
If you could find a way to somehow make that a little bit more,
Cut through or something to kinda connect it.
It's on 2 different grades, and that opens up a whole can of worms and money and all that stuff and everything too. But yeah, and I would think in a perfect world, if you could find a way to do that, that would be great. So.
And I think that's it for me for right now. Appreciate all your hard work.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm going to hit on some of the things, some of my questions have been previously answered. Big elephant in the room is KeyBank been a party to these discussions and planning? Are we just talking about their property without them actually being at the table?
If I may. So, I have had previous discussions with them twice now, prior to the Michigan Ave project, and I was hoping that the second time, which when they were saying that they were offering a possibility of the community utilizing their parking lot during the Michigan Ave project, I thought that'd be a great kind of baby step. But unfortunately, and this was dealing with their corporate offices in Cleveland. Unfortunately, I only got so far, and essentially the folks in real estate department said, we got other bigger fish to fry. These are my words, but that's essentially the way I felt. They had other priorities, and so stop wasting resources on dealing with Saline and go about your business. And so we've talked when Riley and Wally and the team were beginning to put the framework together for this study that they're presenting, and the idea was that waiting to go back to them kind of after they get this information. So that's kind of where it's at right now.
Okay, so we're putting effort into a project that we have no idea if it's even viable at this point, whether they're a willing participant. That's a big concern of mine right now, that we're putting a lot of eggs in that key bank basket with trying to hook it into parking lot 5 and there's a lot of talk in here about reconfiguring their property, and they haven't really indicated that they're at all interested.
Can I answer that? Yeah, I just want to make sure we made it clear that that's a really long-term project that we want you guys to start looking at. So when that opportunity does come knocking, that we're prepared to work with them. So if they come to us and say, to the city, to Todd, and say, hey, we're willing to work with you, we have a plan in place to go ahead working with them on that project. We are not recommending right now. You know what I mean? If they're not willing to work with you, we understand. That's why we included that in the long-term action. The 2 to 5 years is what we were saying for that.
Okay.
And to start planning on that action too.
Right.
Because that is going to cost,
But-
there's cost associated with that you can see with the Beck and Rader study with grading. I don't even believe drainage is one thing addressed in that. I don't know if, Bill, do you want to talk about any of the cost associated with that Beck and Rader? It's, yeah. I mean.
Let me stop for a second. If you don't mind my getting closer so I don't come jumping up. As you know, Main Street, and we put together a fund for having this study done of various ways to reconfigure. There were 2 or 3 meetings that relevant property owners in that area attended, including representatives from Key Bank local. So they were made aware of what we were talking about. They aren't in a position to agree, but they heard it and I think appreciated the fact that it would be very important for the community and for them to have something more accessible and available. They can't make that decision. The costs that are there, I didn't look to see which part of the study was included, but there were 2 or 3 levels of costs and complexity of redevelopment that Beckert and Rader put together. Some of them were more expensive than others. The simplest in my mind, this very simple no-brainer, is if they called Todd someday and said, guys, we've had a change of heart, we'll let you use this for $1 a year, go ahead and use it. Wouldn't that be great? It's a usable parking lot as it is. It doesn't need anything else. You might come in and restripe it, but it would be pretty much a no-brainer to say, here's a city lot. It would help solve the problem of lack of visibility and knowledge of parking lot number 5, because you'd have a city parking lot sign at Michigan Avenue. There's the one that you could shoot a gun through it in most days and hours of the week, and there's nobody there. That, to me, is the low-hanging fruit to get just a decision from Key Bank, carefully structured with the city, to say, we will cover the insurance. As I understand it, that was a concern of theirs in the past, the insurability. There are a lot of banks that allow folks to use their lots, and their insurance covers it. That's not a stopper in my mind. In my mind, when Key Bank says basically we have bigger fish to fry, that's a slap in the face to the city of Saline. The city of Saline keeps a lot of money in their accounts. Just saying. That is not a good response to say you can't use our lot during the time that Michigan Avenue is closed off. That's irresponsible on their part. And that's the first I had heard this, but that makes me really irritated. That's not a good corporate bank to have on the corner. That said, there are levels of cost. And I think what Riley is saying, the more expensive ones reconfiguring, there's some really good ideas to make those a more usable lot further down the line. What I will say is, since this is part of the TIF district, if there's more development downtown, that development money will generate more taxes, which will be captured and could pay for any kind of improvements there. That's something to start planning for. So that's a long answer to the question.
It is, and like I said, I mean, we can talk in circles all we want about, $1 a year for just use versus complete, reconfiguration. If they don't want to be a party to it and they don't want to play, then
Sure.
it stops right there. So I just want to make sure that we're looking at other options beyond that. So that's, I just wanted to make that very clear.
We looked at the Key Bank lot as we need to just go into this and get a final answer. Do everything in our power to try to, be able to use that lot, because it's probably the easiest fix. And if it doesn't work, then yes, we need to look at other things. And one of the things that Todd and I did is we sat down with a footprint of the city and we tried to identify other lots that we may be able to create other partnerships with, whether it's the church lots, that, the existing church lots, other business lots, that are only open during, day business hours that maybe could utilize at night, looking at it like comprehensive, going from one to the other, the new Andy Warner sold the building to Clintonburg next to us. What's the possibilities of those lots being used? We don't know what kind of shift work they're doing, but at least start some initial conversations with other businesses that own lots downstairs to see if we can't leverage whatever is available down there for the inventory. So.
No, that's fine, and like I said, I brought it up because I do recall with the Michigan Avenue project, they did not want to, play with us when it came to parking. And so I just wanted to make sure things had not changed or had changed since then. So, but I'll move off of that now. In the best practices, it talks about the average shopping or business meeting takes less than 90 minutes. This sort of falls under the umbrella of you're never going to make everybody happy, because we had the retail people that came in and said, we need more time because people come downtown and they want to shop and go have lunch. And so that was sort of where 4 hours came from. And so how do you make everybody happy? I mean, is a 2-hour window enough time? Or are people going to just start playing, shuffling cards?
People get paid to give you this information.
No, I'm just
They're the experts,
making
so
statements
that's-
about this, that we just have to make sure that we're looking at everybody at the same time. I mean, 90 minutes does seem viable if you're going downtown to get a haircut or go grab lunch or something like that. But if you're going to go out to dinner and do something else, or go shopping then 90 minutes may not be enough. And so, once again, I would hate for people to come down into downtown, spending time and money, and be ticketed because they stayed too long. So, it's something we'll have to, make mention of and figure out what we can do. The other thing, and I know that both Mr. Haar and Mrs. McClellan mentioned it, is employee parking. I am downtown every single day, and I see people with their work shirts on parking in prime parking spots. I see owners of businesses parking in prime parking spots. The city can only do so much. I mean, if the businesses aren't willing to do something, and I'm not speaking to you directly because I know you've been very proactive about this, and there are going to be a certain number of spots, and I don't know what we can do. I don't know how to police that, because how do you know whether or not it's an employee parking there or a customer in a spot?
Well, I mean, I've got a pretty good pulse on my lot, the lot behind Max. And one of the things that I did when I did the parking, and I didn't do every time, I had managers do the time, but one of the things I did, when I did my inventory for those 10-day period, I took pictures of all the cars during all those during those time periods, and I can tell you that the same 18 cars that are behind Max in the 4-hour parking every day before 11:30 are still there at 3:30 or 4. They're just in different spots. And so those are people that work in the offices and stuff downtown. So going to a business owner of an office that has 40 employees or 30 employees, and so that's a tough thing. So first of all, you want to start ticketing those employees. You know what I mean? Like, it all lies in the puzzle. We have to reach, we have to reach them too. There are business owners too that I've seen. I got pictures of business owners' cars are in the same spot every day too. For the same.
And employees are not going to want to stay in a place where they're getting ticketed while they're at work.
No, but
So, I
but
mean, that's
think-
something we
think
have
what
to.
I think what you need to do is you need to, again, if you're giving everybody the footprint of where they can park without being ticketed, you're being fair and equal in your enforcement, and you're giving them the opportunity so that it's not going around slapping tickets and then 3 weeks later you go around and slap them again, but you actually warn people and get them through. Eventually you change the behavior, but you have to do something to change the behavior. If you don't enforce it, you're not going to change it.
Right.
Because it's not everybody has the same incentive to do it. If you're a high-tech business and all you do is programming and nobody comes to your office, there's no incentive for you to keep parking open for retail spots, except that you're a good corporate partner. And, again, there has to be some level of enforcement on that, so.
Riley, can you just clarify again on the charts? Because that's where I think I had questions.
Yeah.
So where it says percentage, where it says
Yeah,
available
parking,
spaces?
on parking lot number 1,
Okay,
4,
okay.
and 5 are they're the exact opposite of what you see.
So that's spots that are not available?
Not
So that means there was 30 cars parked there at 9:30?
Yes.
Okay.
So when it shows parking lot 1, there is not, I just want to make it clear, it's not 85% available, it's 85%. Oh, no, at that point it is,
Wait, now I'm really confused as to,
yes,
okay, you're looking at the little grids.
yes.
Hold on.
Now, what was I?
These big grids are the same as.
Are the big grids are the same?
Yes.
as the little grids?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah.
Do you see at 3:30, it shows. Yeah, so basically at parking lot number 1, it's the available spaces, it's opposite of 2, 3, and 2 and 3, yeah. 1, 4, and 5 are opposite of the other 2 parking lots.
So on lot number 1 at 3:30, 58%, on Monday at 3:30, 58% of the spaces are not available?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Because that makes sense. When I was trying to figure it out, I was like,
Yeah.
this don't quite
I
match up.
apologize
No,
for
no,
that.
no, that's okay. Do we currently issue any kind of permits or passes for the all-day spots, like to know who's parking in them?
So, excuse me, the way the enforcement works is, in those long-term spots, they don't need it unless they're going to be parking there multiple days. So like you could get if you're going to be there for a week, for instance, you could get a pass. We have, I think, a week and 2-week passes, correct? We've not sold any to date, but basically, well, because the reason for that is that while it's a 24-hour lot, we didn't want somebody using it as a storage lot, right? Parking something there,
Right.
and leaving it there for multiple days. But they can buy a pass that you could park something there 24 hours a day, up to a week, or then there's a second one that you could actually do up to 2 weeks. So we thought if somebody was going out of town on business, whatever it was, you fill in the blank, but they could do that. Other than that, we do not.
Okay. Then my next question, and it's sort of probably for you and for them, is that right now, if we're talking about the new condos, and I hate referring to it as the Mangiano property, we really need to kind of start calling it by something else. Well, it's not smokehouse really, but for assigned parking there, that's going to eat a chunk of the parking spaces there on a full-time basis, because those would be reserved spots theoretically. So does that mean we've got to move our farmers market out of there?
I don't think that there's been any indication that they're going to get reserved.
Those are not, we don't reserve, there are there's other downtown apartments. And the current policy is there's no reserved spaces.
Okay.
So I guess the reason that we brought that up is if you want development like that, then that's something that needs to be in our plan going forward, that should be addressed, not that there was going to be.
Right. Okay.
I'm just going to jump in with a question for Mr. Kinley, who owns apartments downtown, if I may. So what are your rules about, do you have any rules for your apartments about maximum number of vehicles allowed per unit? And how do you manage the number of cars that are associated with your apartments,
Sure.
I guess is the basic question.
I have the luxury that a lot of building owners don't have, and that is for Merchant Square, which I have, where I have 15 apartments, I own a parking lot on Hall. And the good fortune is that I have employees and owners of businesses parked there during the day, and for the most part, apartment owners, residents parking there at night. But I do have written in the leases of the apartment tenants and the business tenants, they can't park in parking lot 1 or on the street on Michigan Ave. So I think I have that in most, if not all, the leases in Murphy's Crossing as well. I don't want, just like Wally and the other responsible business owners, you don't want your tenants and employees to park in the places where customers should park. So I have that written in leases. Now, can I really enforce that? It's tough. I don't want to get a call in my office when somebody says, I spot one of the employees of one of the businesses in the lot. I can come down and say, you really shouldn't do that, which we had one tenant that often did do that. We threatened to evict them as a residential tenant. Finally, with enough eviction notices, he learned. But I totally agree that the way the structure is right now of having the 4 hours encourages employees to park, allows them the leeway to park in the public lots and switch at noon. That's just nature. If you had a shorter time period, I think that allows the city to do the enforcement that's needed.
So I was aware of your lot, and wondered, so it has enough spaces to accommodate all of the cars that are associated with 15 apartments?
Seems to. I have the spaces there, and then I have the spaces right behind that are used something for overflow behind where the chamber is.
Okay,
Those are spaces as well.
okay, thanks. Sorry for the interruption, but it
No.
was...
That's okay.
Miss-
Okay,
more
I'm ready
questions?
to move on. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Gearbach.
Based on all your immediate actions, I'm, supportive of those. I think having those put in place are fine. What I would also like to see is potential striping of Harris and Lewis Street, so that would add permanent spots down there too, because that's for those businesses that are down there. The idea of potentially expanding parking on both sides of maybe Henry Street, I think was one of the things that some of the neighborhoods had wanted to do as part of our traffic calming aspects. And I agree, the issue that, as Ms. DeHar had mentioned, was what time period do we enforce? Because if you start enforcing it between the 7 and 9 period time, you might lose some customers, and that's been the issue that's been a concern. So that was why we went to 4 hours, was because there were so many people upset about going from the enforcement of 2 hours or even 3 hours. So what I would, from my perspective, we would adapt these for a 1-year period at minimum before it gets reviewed, because the problem we always had was we keep changing it every 3 months and it wasn't happening. So there's nothing on here that I see are not consistent with what I think would be a good recommendation to handle it. Short-term and long-term, I agree. The issue of, and I've talked with the mayor prior to that, is that I think if we could utilize the church parking lots it would be not only beneficial for us, but for them, because if we did some of the maintenance work and such for them, it would benefit them. I do have a concern about Klingenberger, because I think they're looking to expand their whole plot and their footprint downtown. So if they go to 1 and 2 shifts, we wouldn't have the availability of that property either. And I do like the idea of potentially using fees for long-term residential use, because I think that's the only way we're going to collect money to address that. My only concern about a parking structure, and I know the university has faced this, and I hate to use that always as an example, but a typical structure runs between $17,000 to $20,000 per space, and then a maintenance of at least $1,000 to $2,000 a year per space. And Plymouth lucked out because they built theirs, almost 40 or 50 years ago, and I don't know if they did a major renovation of it, because I can remember, because I have relatives that live in Plymouth and would go downtown and see that structure, so they were benefited that from very forethought in doing that structure. The other one, as I look at your Phase 1 development, just a couple questions on that. So the proposal in that would be to continue to have the ATM there, but basically removing the structure that's currently there right now. And we would acquire all of that in terms of a, is that I'm looking at?
No.
Yeah, actually, we're looking at Phase 1.
Just understanding that.
These are preliminary, in that meeting that we had with a district manager from KeyBank, there's always, that building's there. It's empty. It's not there. There was this idea of possibly moving the ATM into that bank to open up those lanes. You know what I mean? To not have the ATM in that. And so that was one option in it. As you can see, that would be the stacking lane. As you can see on everybody see the drawing where it says the building, it'll say 105, I believe, right on that. Oh, sorry, I was probably. But yes, that will basically tell you that the ATM would actually move into that building in that phase. Now, that was a preliminary concept from a district manager with KeyBank.
And I like that approach. I mean, I know the bank's going to have a consistent issue probably with the large parking lot, and that back approach would be something to really, we could focus on our negotiations with KeyBank. Would benefit them from a cost perspective of that building, but also from us being able to recommend that. I do, of course, as everyone knows, I do have an issue with private property rights and consideration as we would expand anything else, but this approach looks like it would be something doable, if not even more feasible than I think of trying to acquire all of that property in the short term.
Yep. And there, you would see the private parking lot currently that would be adopted into the public area for people to use. And then I believe there was, what's the term? Todd might know more about the agreements where if they want to do development or they choose to opt out of that, they can opt out of that contract to get their property back.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing because past practices kind of prevented that from happening. There's reverter clauses, but it doesn't allow for construction or changing of the property, which would be more beneficial. The other thing, as I look at more 1 to 2.5 years, whatever, we do have some potential to reconfigure some of our existing lots to perhaps a different layout that would allow to put additional spots into them. And I'm not sure, maybe Todd can answer this. How many spaces did we lose with the Michigan Avenue construction, or did we gain any?
We gained some.
So we did gain some.
I apologize, I don't recall how many, but we did, we lost one that was actually right in front of KeyBank, that was not, it wasn't a legal size, if you will, official, so that, anyway, what we did, we gained some down in front of, from America east along part of Klingenberg now, and then, of course, we opened up back to the 147 West Michigan, where it was, we had to put that temporary sidewalk in, and that kind of eliminated that, but now that parking is back as well.
And so were those spaces as part of this, or is this just looking at our existing lots?
No, it was, this was just looking at parking lot number 5, correct?
I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah,
we have
and
that.
just with the simple simple planning, replanning of that parking lot, you can see that there was a 17 net gain of parking spaces, including that private-public partnerships that would be created, just from that simple area downtown.
And I think one other thing, and we haven't really mentioned it, is we may potentially have to look at a special assessment district or something for the downtown to pay for expansion of parking. We cannot continue to really use general fund dollars and focus on this. I mean, we've put almost $700,000 downtown, in fact, even more than that, And so as we look at parking, I know we need to contribute to it, but at some point, we've got to have the trade-off in terms of the developer and everything else. Because even 147 is potentially going to be another hit, but we know they're going to build their own parking, but I think that's going to be another draw on it. And at that point, as we talked about, how do we build more parking lots or even a structure without having some kind of trade-off or a pool to which we contribute dollars?
The other thing that to consider too, a lot of the information that we gathered too was that there is a switch in small town policy and city policies for people to go. I mean, back in the 70s and 80s when everybody was leaving downtowns to go to the malls, everybody got rid of their parking meters and paid parking. Before that, everybody had parking meeting on the street. It didn't matter where you went. There is a switch for people to go back to. I mean, parking's not free, even if you're paying. You're not paying for it. And I think that there should be some consideration given to clustered, either clustered meters on the street parking, and even maybe the 4 lots that are adjacent to our downtown being gated and being charge people for parking in those lots as a way to capture money going forward. I know that there's a cost to setting that up, and I don't know what the payback is on that, or whether it will generate revenue or down the road, but you can't go anywhere without paying for parking nowadays. I think people are way more worried about convenience and being able to park a space on whether it's going to cost them $5 or $6 to put in, to pay as you're going out if you're having dinner. I mean, I think that's something that we haven't addressed, but it's something that we should consider in the long term.
Yeah, and I would agree with that because being in Milford, they do have that set up, and actually it's a smartphone and all that type of thing that you can do that.
Right.
So I think we are potentially getting to that point. I would like to see us, though, actually be that tipping point before we put that into place. But in the long term, I think that's a good recommendation, and we just got to be able to encourage that at that point. Thanks.
So I work downtown, and it's possible that I will be working more days downtown. So I have a lot of experience with where am I parking, if I'm really tired, do I remember where I parked? Not always. And so I wonder about utilizing more street parking as well for all day and the side streets. And there is a neighborhood really close by to Henry Street where I've parked to go to the farmer's market. So I know I'm a downtown employee, but what would happen if we just eliminated all-day parking? And those lots, all of the spaces were 2-hour.
I think what you need to do is you need to look at this as a giant jigsaw puzzle.
Right.
And then you need to take into consideration that you are going to have all day, employees, the residential parking, the retail parking, and then looking at it to what is the best fit. If that became, if there became a situation where you needed that much retail parking downtown to make all the lots 2-hour parking, then that's something that you would, might consider. Right now, I think, and certainly making street parking that's farther away from those 4 lots available all-day parking makes sense because it gives that an opportunity. I think you have to look at that in the grandeur of everything. So, but
I mean, I feel like with the restaurant opening up in the former Mangiamo space, I feel like we are kind of hitting that tipping point.
yeah. Well, I'll tell you from my standpoint that when we first opened, we used to do 600 lunches a week at max, and that was, and there's a lot of reasons we don't now. I mean, people don't do business the same way. There was a lot of downtown, there was R&B, Chrysler Tool and Die, Crossett, those guys did lunch. That's how they did business. They did lunch. I mean, Jack would know that when we were open. It was just a lot different. The business clientele's changed. We do about 40 or 50 lunches a day now, so it's considerably less. But at 12:30, if you come downtown and you look at the parking lot, there's probably only 6 or 7 open spots. We'd never be able to do 100 lunches and stuff now because there's no convenient parking to do that, especially at lunch hour. When Smoke opens up, I mean, their numbers are probably predicated on the fact that they're going to do 70 or 80 lunches a week, or a day. So it's really going to be jammed up down there. So we just really need to look at that.
Right, I mean, I want to say, we're not looking at down the road, we're there, because they're going to open up.
We are there in a lot of instances, yes. We're not down the road, we are there.
Right. So has that been considered, and having the premium lots?
We haven't really addressed it. I don't, from our standpoint or from my standpoint, I don't, first of all, I'm not a resident on Henry Street. And I know that there's got to be certain consideration to the people that, I did move to town, and I don't know that I'd want 20 cars in front of my place every day, in downtown and part of my place too. So I think there has to be some consideration given to the residents in the streets and, where you're talking and that sort of thing too. I'm sure they're used to people parking there on Summerfest, Oktoberfest and stuff, because there's cars everywhere downtown during those days. So they're used to having people in front of it. I think you have to look at it from a standpoint of looking at all of it and what's best for your downtown. And, to your point, you're never going to make everybody happy. That's for sure. But if you want more businesses in town, if you want more tax revenue, if we want to be known as a proactive place in terms of development, then we got to make some decisions somewhere with that, and that might be an opportunity. So, but that's a planning issue, and we didn't really get into that nuts and bolts, because I don't even know what the ordinances are for parking down there. I mean, so.
Todd, do you have experience with municipalities moving towards more street parking for residences?
Not per se what we're talking about now, but, we've looked at, certain streets have certain regulations if they're a major street or a local street. And certainly Gary and Jeff can talk to those, because we've talked about, because we've had discussions, I've had discussions with Wally and Riley and about the ideas of, parking on both sides of Henry, for instance. But my understanding is that because it's a major street, you have to have a minimum width, and that's not there. You actually have to obviously make it wider and physically make it wider. But so what I would say is, where we are able to make additional on-street parking spaces, then certainly I think, I'm intrigued by your comment about, what if we just have 2-hour parking? I'm not, usually it's someplace in the middle, right? You've heard me, most of you heard me talk from occasions about balance, so things are about balance, and sometimes you go too far one way or the other, right? So I don't know that totally eliminating that is the idea, but to change their thinking, right, and their habits of doing that. So I don't know if we encourage additional parking. You talk to, we probably all have talked to folks that live here now or that have maybe lived in larger cities, major cities, and they're like, really, parking problem? No, I don't think so. I can walk within 10, 12 blocks, I'm good to go, right? But this is not unique to Saline. This is similar small towns all over have the same challenge, and at least the successful communities, which we are, and we want to continue to be. So, having said that, I think certainly open to other ways, to sit down and maybe we look at some streets, and they may not be, right adjacent to the exterior of the downtown proper, if you will. They may be a couple blocks away, but those are some thoughts that I would say.
Can I?
Yeah.
When you talk about the minimum requirement, width, is that a city issue or is that a state or a county?
State.
State, okay.
And I'm sorry, can I just confirm, Henry is or is not wide enough to have parking on both sides?
My understanding, it's not wide enough, correct, Gary? It's,
doesn't meet Main Street criteria right now.
Okay, so,
You need parking on one side.
so,
Only there because it's grandfathered.
I'm sorry, what's grandfathered?
Just the one side parking on Main Street.
I see, okay. So making that available as an all-day parking option, you know, the farther away, that's all-day parking, and maybe we have, you know, our premium lots, our considered premium lots only have 2-hour parking. That would be my suggestion. I'm interested in, and I will explore the public-private partnership as far as the possibility of a parking structure. You know, it's only money. I don't think I have a lot to add at this point.
I like Mr. Gearbaugh, totally buy into your immediate actions, your short-term recommendations. Frankly, I was a little surprised when the city went from 2-hour to 4-hour parking as it is now. Is there still a downtown business association?
Oh, I believe you're talking about the SDMA. Was that what it was called? Oh, the BD, yes. We actually, Main Street was adopted into that.
Okay,
That
all right,
adopted
good.
into Main Street.
I didn't want to,
That's where
sit here and
Same,
say,
same
oh,
basic
yeah,
concept
let's go to
right now.
2-hour, and then have another group come in here 2 weeks from now and say, whoa, 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 whoa.
No, no.
Okay.
That won't be happening, no.
All right, good. I think the 2-hour recommendation is great. I think your other things here are low-hanging fruit, like you've said, and could probably be fairly quickly implemented. Insofar as your suggestion, Ms. Mitchell, I think we ought to take it a step at a time. I think we ought to make the 4-hour parking 2-hour parking. I think what you say about enforcement is absolutely necessary. If it's not enforced, people are going to learn very quickly that it's not enforced, and they're going to do what they please anyway. So there needs to be some kind of parking enforcement, and I'm not sure we have the capacity to do that now. So that might mean hiring additional person hours to see to that particular chore. So there's an expense there too. So we may have to end up going either to paid parking in the long term. That might be a long-term solution. Paid parking usually doesn't even pay for itself. The cost of the administration and the expense of hiring people to empty meters or to take care of even the kiosks now that they have where you can feed it with a credit card. I'm not sure how well they operate or how much maintenance they require. But I know in the past, in Ann Arbor, where you had the standard parking meters where you dump quarters in, we not only had problems because we had to have somebody empty the meters, but then we had problems overseeing the people who emptied the meters to make sure that they didn't get their fingers in the nickels and dimes. So everything has its own administration, its own burden, its own overhead. So those are all things that have to be carefully considered. But I think the short-term recommendations certainly stand on their own and can be done. And then I think we need to take a deep breath, see where we are. I think if we're going to do this, though, and change to 2-hour parking, we absolutely must have some kind of consistent enforcement. That's an excellent point you make. And as a former police officer, that's what I believe in, too. You know?
Anything else, Mr. Seal?
Well, I think in the long term, we really do need to study other things. Like, I think the middle term would be partnership with Key Bank. If they say no, and you're going to have to consider going to some other sort of a thing, especially when the new barbecue restaurant comes into town, when the 147 property begins to get developed. That's going to bring its own parking concerns. I know they'll probably have some parking places, but if there's any commercial or any other kind of business goes into those same buildings, like is proposed under the previous person who is going to locate there, that's going to generate more parking demand. Parking demand, like sewer demand, is only going to go up. So I think we need to plan for the long term, and it's going to be expensive. I know if you begin to put in underground parking, like Mr. Rhodes had expressed, I think that is even more expensive. It has to be sprinkled, and I know in Ann Arbor, when they began to experience the subterranean parking, they suddenly had a demand for a BDA, a bidirectional amplifier, for people to use their cell phones, for police officers to use their radios. I mean, one thing begets another, begets another, begets another. So let's take it incrementally. Let's work in the short term with what they've given us, see how it goes, carefully assess it, carefully enforce it, and then keep our eye on it. We're going to have to keep our eye on it so we can move ahead judiciously.
Thank you, Mr. Sium. Well, first, Mayor Pro Tem Tar, thank you for filling in. From what I was told by Linda, everyone's had an opportunity to raise questions and concerns. Is that correct? Does anybody have any additional questions at this time? And then Linda also said embedded within your questions and comments was opinions on a number of recommendations, in particular those in the immediate future. Is that correct? Okay. For some, okay. So let me ask this question then to the group. I'm looking at page number 6. So it's immediate actions, and I numbered them. There are 5 bullets there, 1 through 5. Mr. CEO, I came in midway through your comments. It seems as though you're supportive of all of those changes. Is that correct, sir?
That is correct.
Okay. Can I jump to you, Councilwoman Mitchell? How do you feel about those 5 short-term changes?
I agree with them with the exception of number 3. I do not think we should increase all-day parking spaces, but I would be interested in exploring some kind of permitting process with downtown residents.
Okay, very good. Mr. Gearbaugh?
Yeah, I agree with all of them. My only concern, again, is Mr. Seo has said, is the enforcement and how we're going to handle that and determine whether we need to hire a parking person or do we use our police force as we currently do.
Okay, very good. Ms. Dillon?
Yeah, it's sort of a pick and choose type thing. I'm fine with changing the parking over from 4 hours to 2 hours. Increasing the all-day parking spaces and things, I once again sort of feel like we've done this before, where we just start doing too much at one time, and then we don't know really what's working, what's not working. So it would be my preference to just start sort of at the 2-hour mark and
So just to be clear, so you're sort of, your position is on par with that of Councilwoman Mitchell, which is you're sort of a no at the moment on bullet point number 3.
Correct.
Okay, very good. Councilwoman McClellan.
Yeah, I guess I'm okay with it. I am a little bit concerned about going from 4 to 2. I know there was a lot of issue with the 2-hour parking when we had it, I don't know, prior to the Michigan Ave construction, and the sort of the comments that came up before about, does that hinder business? I mean, I know it helps certain businesses, but on other ones, is it hindering? Like worried about, like, I can't go shopping because I'm going to have to go move my car after I eat, and then if I'm going to move my car, I'm just going to leave, I know I had heard from a few people that was sort of a negative, I guess. So I don't know if we go from 4 to 3, if that makes a difference, or if we just go to 2 and see how it goes. I don't know. But I guess that's just a little bit concerning to me. I'm not saying that I'm not.
So a little bit of hesitation.
Yeah, a little bit of hesitation on that. And then I agree. I don't think that we need to increase any all-day parking spaces at this point. I think let's see how it goes with the other things first, and then address that as we get a little bit further down the road. Maybe not too far down the road, but.
So also then a no on
Yeah. Yep. And I think that, and then I'm not sure on the last one are we posting one sign for each spot that says customer parking only? I think that may be a little bit excessive.
No, I would think of it would be more like, you have one area, you have a sign that says 2-hour parking available here, and then you would just say 2-hour customer parking available here. That's what we were proposing, not.
Okay. I just
not
like,
that
I don't want
no,
to see
not-
like
not-
every sign
no,
that says,
no.
Max or Dan's
No.
or whatever.
We were just looking at ways to discourage people that are working downtown from taking those spaces.
Right.
And I would add for the 24-hour spaces, I think that the reasonable expectation why we put that there was if we certainly don't want to be in a situation where we're putting a business that has employees downtown in a situation where they want to move out and go to an office park because hey, if you're going to start giving my employees parking tickets. So I think the key with that was, maybe not increasing the 24-hour parking spaces necessarily in those lots, but also doing a better job of educating so that we allow to get them to the 24-hour spots so they're not getting tickets.
Right, yeah, I think, and I would be in agreement with that. I would say, if you say,
And that might
you
be
can have
something
all-day parking you want in parking
that's
lot
more of
3
a
and
Main
parking
Street
lot
issue in
5,
terms
then
of doing,
have at it.
some more proactive
Right.
relationships with them.
I mean, just letting people know that there's all-day parking here and here, and
Ms. Sahar?
Yes, well, so I will say first that whatever we do, someone made this point earlier, and I couldn't agree more. Whatever we do, we need to do it for at least a year. Or some defined period of time, because when we've had parking discussions before, when we changed from 2 to 4, and then we changed our minds about 1,000,000 times within 6 months, it felt like. And that's just bad. So whatever we do, I think we need to define the period of time and not change it in that period of time, not change our minds, not let ourselves be lobbied into, no, change it to 3, no, change it to 2. So I think that's really important. I think one, enforcement clearly is very important. We haven't really, we don't have here what times enforcement would be, so that would be important to establish as well. Are we enforcing only in the evening? Are we enforcing only in the afternoon, in the evening? Are we, when is, like, that needs to be defined still. I have some questions myself about 2 hours, but because I can walk everywhere from home, I don't have to worry about getting a ticket. I know that when we started enforcing 2-hour time periods, there was at least one restaurant downtown, maybe more, who was the owner was offering to pay any customers parking tickets if they got a ticket for parking for more than 2 hours downtown while they were at his restaurant. So, there may be some creative solutions to the people who have problems with 2 hours. And the other thing about increasing all-day parking spaces, I don't think we should increase what we have currently established in our city lots. I think, however, all-day parking will increase in other areas if all of those spots get filled, that will just occur naturally. I don't think we need to designate more all-day spots in outer areas, because people will go and find them if they need them.
Well, briefly, do you feel like you have some consensus and direction here? Ms. Campbell?
I think so, but I agree because I know the point. If you do it correctly, it's 2 hours. Right now, it's 4 hours from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Saturday. And we enforce on Sunday. We do with a current on-duty officer, so 4 hours approximately. So they'll go out, around the 8-ish time period, unless they're on a call or something, they'll run tires, and they'll do their best to get back with it, after the 4 hours expires. Sometimes it's 5 hours, sometimes it's 8, just depends on what they have on the day. So they do it on a consistent basis every 2 hours. Which is exactly right. There will be some additional cost if you do with existing officers. So if I could, that wouldn't be, but my thought is to bring back analysis of what we cost to do that.
Yes, I think that would be prudent. I think adding this as a discussion item at our first meeting in September, because in addition to enforcement, there are probably some other issues that we need to discuss. I would encourage my council colleagues between now and our first meeting in September to think about the point that Mayor Pro Tem Tahar made, because I think it's an excellent one. I think whatever consensus, when we develop consensus, we implement some policy changes. I believe it is critically important to stick with those changes. I would suggest to you. and to stay the course and to not have flip and knee-jerk reactions when people complain or when people object to the policy. I think we need to stay the course, see how it affects our downtown, the viability of our downtown, and after a calendar year has been exhausted, then maybe to assess where we're at. We're going to need to also revisit point number 3 because at least at this juncture, it appears that there's a majority who are not in favor of that particular change. And the only other statement that I would make, because we're running short on time here, is I'm in favor of all of the immediate changes. I do have some hesitation on bullet point 1, similar to Councilwoman McClellan, but I'm not going to die on that hill. If the majority wants to move forward and change from 4 to 2 hour parking, that would be acceptable. I would make, however, one addition, or recommend that we make one addition to the 5 bullet points that are recommended for immediate action. And I think that the 4th bullet point under short-term action must be elevated. As many of you know, we had attempted to negotiate with the Key Bank, it's probably been about a year and a half ago now, and the response that we get from Key Bank's corporate office, well, let me put it this way, the way they respond to the glacial pace. And so I think if we're going to make any headway and accomplish anything tangible on that front, we need to begin to engage them and engage them robustly as soon as possible. And I think it's also critically important to remind our friends at Key Bank that the city of Saline historically has done a lot of business with that bank and that particular branch. And the viability of the downtown should be just as important to Key Bank as it is to every other business owner and deed holder in our downtown. So I offer that for Key Bank to think about. Because I think it would be mutually beneficial to both them and to the community as a whole. So unless there's objections, you have some direction, you'll come back with some data, and we'll discuss this as a discussion item at our first meeting in September.
Actually, just real quick, for number 2, about changing the street parking ordinance, my thought is that we also come back with analysis of here's the streets that we work with,
Perfect. Wally, please.
Just one more point. I know that you do strategic planning and long-term budgeting, and 5-year plan. I know I was at the meetings that were at Union School where we broke into subcommittees and went to all those rooms. Just about every room that we went into, the parking came up in some sort of fashion, and I don't know whether that got put into your strategic plan, but I ask that you consider putting that into your strategic plan and start thinking of ways to capture funds to do something long-term down the road, because we're probably talking long-term down the road. If we start recapturing money now, we're probably talking 4 or 5 years from now. So if we wait 4 or 5 years, we're really talking 10 years from now, which is really going to restrict, growth downtown. However we decide to do that, or however you decide to do that, I think it's important that still is being addressed. So.
Great. Gentlemen, we appreciate your time. We got to get out of here, folks. We're already running 5 minutes behind. The chair would entertain a motion to adjourn at 7:34 p.m.
So moved.
Moved by Beardlaw, seconded by Councilman Seal. All those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. Meeting is adjourned. We will revisit this as a discussion item at our next regular council meeting. Again, we appreciate everyone's participation and those who commented publicly.